Welcome, and thanks a lot for being here. It's 3:30 on Thursday afternoon at reInvent, so really do appreciate you guys being here. I'm Rod Stallmuller. I'm with Aviatrix, so you can tell from the orange shoes and the logo, and I took my hat off, but I got all the bling. So, and I'm being joined today. Our head of product management is with us today, Chris McHenry, and we have two customers that are going to join us on a panel afterwards. Jason Simpson and Brent Fowler. Jason is with Choice Hotels and Brent Fowler is with Republic Airways. So both of them are users of the product, and we're going to be talking about some of the things that we do today. I'm going to spend a few slides just doing an introduction for you guys for anybody who's not familiar with Aviatrix, and then Chris is going to come up and talk about our distributed cloud firewall, which we started shipping in May, and how it takes advantage of our distributed system. So we'll open up for questions. We'll have the panel discussion afterwards. We'll have a few questions, and then also open it up to the audience for questions. So please think about what you might want to know if that we don't cover in the presentation, and feel free to ask questions then. So just to give you a little bit of background about Aviatrix. Aviatrix was founded in 2014, right? And in 2018, we were the transit gateway in AWS. And then at reInvent in 2018, AWS released their transit gateway. And a lot of people at Aviatrix at the time were like, oh, they killed us, right? That's it, that's what we do. But the reality was, Dave Brown brought our CTO up on stage and said, we're going to do basic networking. If you want advanced networking, you should talk to Aviatrix. And so what we did is we expanded the capability of our transit gateway, and we extended that, and made it work in Azure and Google and Oracle and Alibaba, so that infrastructure teams had the ability to have the same networking, the same security, the same visibility, same automation across multiple clouds. So that's really the foundation of what I'll describe as our distributed system here. And in 2020, we actually started embedding security into that distributed system that we were doing networking with. Now we could do security in the natural path of traffic. And now in 2023, we have over 500 big enterprise customers, more than 50 of the Fortune 500 in 25 countries around the world. And that ranges inside from 10 VPCs to 5,000 VPCs. So you can see there's a range of kinds of customers that we're working with, mostly very large enterprises. So if I describe what essentially our system is, it's a distributed system. It's based on the Aviatrix control plane, and the control plane has a controller, and that's what you actually download out of the cloud marketplace. That controller then actually deploys and manages the distributed system. So the distributed system is actually where we do the networking, where we have the embedded telemetry that allows us to do the visibility and troubleshooting capabilities that we offer. It's where the embedded security is that we do the distributed cloud firewall with. It's a cloud operating model, meaning things scale up and scale down as they need to support the kind of traffic and what you're doing in your environment. And it's consistent across the environments. And as I mentioned, proven at scale with 5,000 VPCs in one of our customers. Now, we also support Terraform automation. So this entire thing, lots of our customers start with our GUI, clicking and building. But anything that you build through our GUI can be exported to Terraform, and pretty soon people move to an entire infrastructure as a code deployment. And they even learn Terraform a lot of times by using the tools, because they know what it's actually doing by looking at the code, and they knew what they did in the UI. Now, one of the things that we've noticed, and you've probably noticed, over the years, we've found out that a lift and shift approach to bringing an application into the cloud is probably not the best approach. It's really better to do more of a cloud design, cloud native type deployment. And this is the same thing with networking and security. So we're not lifting and shifting, a Cisco CSR or a Palo Alto Networks firewall and sticking it into the cloud, the same thing that it was on-prem. We're actually leveraging a well-architected framework that you're all familiar with from AWS, but this framework can be extended into multiple clouds. So we hit on almost all of the different areas. Of course, sustainability is something that the cloud providers themselves really hit on, but our software hits on all the other areas of a well-architected framework. Now, as I mentioned, we started in 2020 taking advantage of this distributed cloud architecture, this distributed system. And then what we did there was called Threat IQ. Now, what Threat IQ did is it leveraged the fact that we could see every packet flowing across the network. And we would look at the source and destination address of that packet and compare it to a database of malicious IPs. We didn't actually make the database for the malicious IPs. It's made by Proofpoint, the same guys that do it for guard duty. But what it allowed us to do is identify anywhere that there was something talking to a malicious code or malicious IP, and we could actually shut it down because we had the capability in the network to create that blocking rule. And now what we've done is we've taken that further, and we're doing a lot of other things in security. And I want to introduce Chris McHenry, who runs our product management. He's actually running all of product management now. Congratulations. He was the guy behind all of the distributed cloud firewall. And so he's going to take the presentation from here and go into some details.
Awesome. Thanks, Rod. So first off, again, thank you for coming. Thank you, Rod, for introducing me. We're going to spend the rest of the time talking about one of the things that has really helped, one of the things that I'm really incredibly passionate about, which is helping organizations improve their security posture in the cloud. And this is something that has been, I think, challenging for a long time. You can go out onto the show floor. You're going to see a ton of organizations that are looking at how do we improve your security posture. But one of the things that's really shifted in the cloud is, there's a lot of things that are different. There's different limitations. You have software-defined networking that makes things like encryption a little bit more challenging. You have complexity that can be added into these cloud architectures. One of the things that's incredible about cloud is the speed that it brings. And there's this historical perception that security slows things down. And so we have this battle between the application developers and the business and the complexity that oftentimes come from security. And so just like Rod had mentioned beforehand, I think one of the reasons that's the case is because many of the traditional security vendors didn't fundamentally rethink how to do security in a cloud-native way. They didn't think about how would we well architect this if we were to refactor and re-architect our security applications. Now, security is also oftentimes a complexity trigger, and security and networking have been very tightly aligned for many, many, many years, right? If you look at what a firewall effectively is it's something that passes traffic. If you look at what a router or a gateway is, it's something that passes traffic. I was in a meeting with a customer probably a year ago, and we had the security guy in the room, and we had the network guy in the room, and they weren't necessarily friends with each other, and they finally had this come to Jesus moment where it's like, oh, well, as a network guy, I care about passing traffic, but I want the traffic to go through. And the security guy is like, I do too, I just want it to stop, right? And it's like the same thing, just slightly opposite objectives, right? So security actually, interestingly enough, despite the fact that we are a networking company, is oftentimes a driver for why organizations choose Aviatrix. So one of our fundamental technologies is something called high-performance encryption that allows you to do encrypted, to create encrypted tunnels between the cloud and other clouds, between the cloud and on-premises, to do that in a resilient way, but to do that while overcoming some of the limitations of software-based encryption. So we can do IPsec encryption with a single click at up to 50 gigabits per second, which is really, really interesting, especially when you start to look at your direct connect links. We have partnerships with Equinix as well, where you can deploy our software off of the Equinix marketplace to help accelerate your secure connections up to the cloud. Egress security. This has been a use case for us for a really long time as well. In fact, this is something that's, I guess, a personal passion of mine. It was a big aha moment for me when I started to play in the cloud space. And again, is driven by the simplicity and the speed that the cloud drives, which is, all of a sudden I'm out here and I'm building these applications and I'm interacting with these amazing services and I'm connecting out to S3 and I'm using third-party APIs. And that's the internet, and that's amazing. And the simplicity with which you can connect to the internet when you deploy an application in the cloud is really incredible. The challenge with that is that it's the internet, right? And the internet is not the safest place when it comes to networking. And so when we think about how can we improve our security posture, we'll talk a little bit about how we can upgrade NAT gateways in the environment to turn them from something that's forwarding traffic out to the network to something that actually gives you that visibility, that gives you that threat control, that helps you align with a zero trust framework in the way that we interact with other applications and does it in a very cost-effective and simplistic way. We've been shipping our FQDN egress solution since 2018, and this is one of the foundational things that we used to build our distributed cloud firewall engine, which we'll talk about in just a second. Number 3, service insertion. So for a long time, again, network security driven, one of the complexity drivers for networking is the ability to insert other networking services. And that oftentimes comes in the form of a firewall, right? So your security team comes to you, they say, hey, I have my Palo Altos, and you've been operating in the cloud by yourself for a while, and I don't feel very comfortable with that. Can you bring your Palo Altos in, right? And while that's doable with native technologies, it's oftentimes relatively complex. That's where you start to have to introduce complex traffic engineering. You have to introduce load balancers. It's especially if you want selective insertion, it gets really, really challenging. One of the demonstrations that we typically do with our FireNet feature is that I'll show you deploying centralized firewall insertion and very quickly determining which VPCs get inspected, which VPCs don't get inspected, and being able to do that across multiple regions and across multiple clouds. And this has been a really important anchor technology for us. And one of the things that's really interesting about it is it's actually a security initiative, right? It's the security piece that drives the complexity that causes you to need a more simplistic solution. And then lastly, Rod talked about threat detection and mitigation, providing that basic level of control to do things like stopping command and control in an environment, stopping data exfiltration, stopping Bitcoin mining potentially. Bitcoin mining is one thing when it's in your data center, but when it charges you for your burstable CPU credits, that's not nearly as cool. So we want to stop that kind of stuff. So we'll talk a little bit about FireNet first. This is our service insertion. Again, incredibly popular use case for Aviatrix, driving simplicity in the way that you deploy third-party firewalls. We do have strong partnerships with Palo Alto, with Checkpoint, and with Fortinet. But what's interesting about this is we looked at this use case, and it's been something, again, that's been very important for us for a number of years. But when I look at this, having been in the networking and network security space for a while, this feels a lot like bringing my data center with me into the cloud, right? You have this centralized inspection point. You're forking all of the traffic through there. The cloud is supposed to be horizontally scalable. It's supposed to be resilient. We're supposed to reduce the number of failure domains that we have. I've been at Aviatrix for about 2 years, and I have had multiple times where I've seen customers where for some reason, right, if a single firewall fails in a centralized architecture, the blast radius is very large, right? I mean, you're going to have impacts. I don't care if you fail over, you'll fail over. That's great. But the blast radius of a failure is very, very large. And there's costs associated with this as well. These are typically very big instance sizes. They carry big licensing. A lot of these firewalls were not designed to be very infrastructure as code heavy or infrastructure as code friendly. And so we saw a lot of opportunity to rethink what a firewall looks like. We saw a lot of opportunity to take advantage of some of the transitions in the security industry around moving from a threat-based approach to a zero-trust approach. And we wanted to build we thought, what would this look like if I were to take the well-architected framework and I were to apply that to network security? And so earlier this year, we announced what I think is one of the biggest announcements with Aviatrix in the last 4 or 5 years, and that is our distributed cloud firewall product. And what we've done here is rather than bolting network security onto the network, we've built network security into the foundation of the network. So as you are leveraging the Aviatrix network, you can do things like saying dev can't talk to prod, And you don't have to think about whether that traffic goes through a firewall. You don't have to think about where dev and prod actually live. The system is intelligent enough to understand where and how that policy needs to be enforced. And that has a lot of really interesting implications. The entire network itself starts to act as a single virtual firewall. Centralized configuration with distributed inspection and enforcement. And distributed inspection and enforcement is really, really important because this allows us to do things like scale naturally as the environment grows. As you add more applications, you actually add more throughput to your network security platform. When you think about how do we forward traffic, data transfer in the cloud costs money. Being able to send traffic out directly to the internet versus sending it back to a centralized location, that saves you money, right? I mean, data transfer costs money. So if we can improve the paths that the traffic takes, we can improve performance, we can improve resiliency, and we can improve cost. We have demos of this. Every time you see a demo, by the way, in the session, we have demos of this on our booth at the show floor. So when you configure that policy, again, we talked a little bit about this being distributed. A lot of times people ask, okay, well, do I have to figure out where it gets enforced? Do I have to think about, oh, this is the thing that gets enforced in this particular VPC? No, that's one of the other really interesting things. Is we designed this to be familiar. We designed this to actually drive some of the simplicity of a centralized firewall and the fact that you have a single point of control, you have a single policy. But the controller, because it understands the network, it knows where all the different systems live, it's intelligent enough to push just the policy that's necessary to each of the individual enforcement points. That's really interesting because one of the questions I get a lot of the time is, okay, well, I've tried this before. I have to push all these 10,000 rules to every single firewall. It's going to be super inefficient. No, when you only push the right rules, you actually can be incredibly efficient with the resources that you're using. In fact, on average, the way that we do this, right, is we use software instances to actually that we call gateways to forward the traffic through. On average, in AWS, we have over 20,000 gateways deployed. The vast majority of those instances are T3s. About 80% of them are T3 large or smaller. And so that gives you a sense of, we've actually spent a lot more time thinking about how do we shrink the security stack? How do we make it run on smaller instances with the same level of performance than we've thought about how we scale it up? Because that's the benefit of horizontal scaling. Another big innovation here is we don't want to write policies based on IP addresses, right? I mean, that's not the cloud. I think if you're used to managing a traditional firewall, you probably have run into the scenario where your application team comes in and they say, hey, I'm going to redeploy my application over and over and over again, and every time you do it, it gets new IP addresses, right? So what do? Do you have to open another ticket with the firewall, or the other option is you have overly permissive policies, right? Well, we can get the best of both worlds if we change from an IP-centric way of thinking to an identity-centric way of thinking. And so we introduced this concept of something that we call a smart group. And smart groups are really interesting because in the cloud, we actually have interesting forms of identity already. Most of the systems are tagged. They also have attributes that we can pull from the cloud portals, right? So I can say things like, I want to apply this network security policy to any system that's in this account, or any system that's in this region, or any system that has this lifecycle, or a combination of all of those different kinds of things, right? So that you can be very prescriptive about the identity of the workload, and then that policy will follow that identity. You don't have to know what the IP address is in order to effectively enforce policy. So smart groups are really powerful. This is one of the places where you're also going to see us continue to innovate, continue to invest, expanding different kinds of smart groups, things like integrating with Kubernetes, which you should see in the first half of next year as well. Here's a good example of how this works, right? If we dive a little bit deeper, we've got a smart group here that's targeting just our web tier of our WordPress application. And we're actually matching against 4 different types here. So we're looking for EC2 instances that have this particular environment tag, this particular role, this particular application, and live in this particular cloud. What's also cool is you can see on the upper left-hand side there with resource selection, in real time, we can tell you what this is rendering out to. You say, hey, I've got one resource that matches this particular tag. As those resources evolve and change, if it auto-scales, you'll automatically see which resources are a member of that group. So what's really cool about this is, you could have smart groups that span multiple different multiple different locations inside of the environment. You don't have to think about where to push those policies, right? So smart group A, as an example, may just be looking at that one particular region. Smart group B may be capturing anything that's in the cloud, could be spread across multiple different locations. You don't have to think about it. The controller's intelligent enough to figure out the best way to enforce that policy. And it's not just layer 4 policy. We're not just talking about the things that are similar to what you would do with the security group, although security groups are a really interesting use case for us. If you've been in your organization through a migration from a VPC peering environment to a transit environment, you'll probably recognize that you had to rethink the way that you did security groups because you can't reference them through a transit gateway. This is a really interesting use case. We've helped several of our customers migrate from those style environments where you can now reference attributes across multiple different VPCs, across a transit environment, and still enforce effective and dynamic policies. But it's more than that, right? We're not just talking about layer 4 firewalling. In fact, especially as we start to look at a couple different areas. One, the egress area, right? I want to have access to S3, or I want to have access to this particular third-party API, or I want to send my traffic back to Datadog, as an example, because I have my Datadog agents installed. You don't necessarily, you might not have those tags. You're not in the Datadog account. You need to be able to do it at a higher level. You need to be able to do it at a service-oriented level. You need to be able to do it with things like domain names and URLs and the things that you would expect from a next-generation firewall. And so we support that as well, being able to do things like URL filtering. Maybe you're not ready for zero trust. Maybe you want to get the benefit of having threat blocking, right? I just want to block those command and control environments. I want to be able to do things like virtual patching, right? What is virtual patching, right? I was having a conversation with one of our large customers a little while back, and we were talking about the Log4j vulnerability that came out a few years ago. And I said, hey, what was your response to that vulnerability in your on-prem environment? And he said, oh, it's super, super easy. We just blocked LDAP on our next generation firewalls. I said, what was your response to that vulnerability in the cloud? He's like, we scrambled like crazy, right? We bought this vulnerability scanner. We looked at all these different places where the thing was installed. We talked with our 10, 15 different application teams, tried to make them patch, and all the while we were vulnerable because we didn't have a compensating control. Right? So being able to go into an environment and say, click, I'm going to block this vulnerability, and then you have time to patch, those are things that are actually really critically important security controls. So we added IDS, and we're adding IPS later this spring. And that'll allow you to do things like virtual patching. Basic things, NAT, right? It's kind of interesting, right? When we look at the deployment model for this, we also do NAT, right? So one of the things that has been incredibly important for us is the ability to seamlessly integrate with an existing architecture. So what you can do is you can deploy Aviatrix. You can click Enable Aviatrix Egress. We will take over the traffic, and you can turn your NAT gateway off. We'll do NAT, and we'll do the embedded security. And we'll do it in your existing architecture. If you have centralized NAT gateways, no problem. If you have distributed NAT gateways, no problem. We'll do the security there as well. And then one of the things that's really popular as we start to think about moving towards a zero trust environment is not just thinking about zero trust to the internet, not just thinking about zero trust between applications, but also thinking about how do we do zero trust inside of an environment. And so I hear common concerns from customers around, hey, my security group management is getting out of control. What if I could write a tag-based policy that says dev can't talk to prod, and if that policy needs to be enforced inside of a VPC, we render that as a security group. If that policy needs to be enforced between VPCs, we enforce that in our gateways. And so you don't have to think about how you enforce a policy, and that includes things like microsegmentation. And there's other interesting things that we're going to be doing in this space as well. So it's not just standard firewalling. We want to be able to make sure that we have both the high end of the level in the threat detection and mitigation realm, as well as unifying that with what's oftentimes a separate strategy and microsegmentation. So this should be obvious, right? We just talked about something that doesn't really look like a firewall architecturally, but it acts like a firewall in practicality. And what is that? What did we do? We refactored, we re-architected, we looked at what a well-architected firewall would look like, and in the same way, when you well-architect an application, you see things like better performance, lower cost, improved resiliency. You see the exact same thing with distributed cloud firewall. So to take a look at that, we looked at a representative sample size of our customers. So we're going to do an example of what a centralized firewall architecture would look like in a traditional kind of native deployment with an inspection VPC, and incomparable to that, what that would look like with Aviatrix. So we'll start out with the number of enforcement points, right? So this is kind of interesting, right? On the surface level, you look here and you say, oh, well, I only have 30 enforcement points. That's interesting. I've got 580 on the other side, right? Because I've got all these different VPCs. Remember, this is a distributed system. You don't actually manage the life cycle of those. It's a lot like we took a lot of inspiration from Kubernetes, right? We treat a lot of these things like cattle, not pets. The controller manages the life cycle, deploys it, upgrades it, does all of those different things. So yeah, there's more instances, but on the left-hand side, we're using 4XLs, and on the right-hand side, we're using T3 smalls. So what's interesting about that is despite the fact that there are almost 10 times as many enforcement points on the Aviatrix side, we are getting a lower monthly cost for those particular instances. Now, what's also interesting is when you spread this out, you have more compute power, you have more NICs. With the Aviatrix Distributed Cloud Firewall engine, we can get about 5 gigabits per second of burst out of a T3 instance. On the left-hand side, you can get about 7 gigabits per second. And so what that means is that when you look at the system as a whole, we're getting significantly better performance when you compare it to the other side. And we've significantly reduced the failure domain. If any one of these enforcement points fails, the only thing that fails is that one availability zone in that one VPC. And so again, go back to the well-architected framework, all of this should make sense when you re-architect and you refactor in a way that's optimized for the cloud. These are the benefits that you would expect to get. So let's take a look at how to get there. One of the most popular ways for organizations to get there, again, we want to make this easy. One of the things I'm fundamentally passionate about is really helping organizations improve their security posture. And so one of the places where many customers start is on what we call secure egress. So this is how do you add security? How do you add visibility to the egress points outside of your network? Now that might be to the internet. It might be to other public services inside of AWS. We can do some really interesting things here with optimizing cost as well, because there's data transfer charges that are typically associated with NAT gateways. One important point here is we do not charge for data transfer in our system. We want to make it a really predictable cost model, so we just charge hourly. We do not charge for data transfer. And so upgrading NAT gateways is one of the first places where people start. And there's some pretty concrete cost savings that can be associated with this. So we actually do have a total cost of ownership calculator on our website that can compare both the centralized firewall architecture to the Aviatrix Distributed Cloud Firewall, as well as just basic NAT gateway migrations. So we upgrade those with Aviatrix. And one thing that's interesting here is, yes, immediately you start to get the security. You start to get some cost savings. But you also get really deep visibility into what's going out of your network. And I had a customer a couple weeks ago come to me, and they were saying, we turned these things on and we realized that we were sending a ton of data back to an S3 bucket in the wrong region, right? Just fat-fingered that particular URL, sending it back to the wrong region. And they had a significant amount of data transfer costs that they could optimize. It's hard to optimize data transfer when you have no idea what's actually going into it. I had another customer that was saying that individually they discovered that their APM was consuming about 15% of their total data transfer charges. And the only way they could find that out was by looking, not at IP addresses. Very hard to see what a service is when you're looking at IPs, but by looking at the URLs that were going out of the environment. So immediately you get visibility, you get threat blocking, you start to improve your security posture. And then we actually give you the ability to baseline the environment to discover which URLs, which services are in use, and you can lock that down automatically from the user interface to move it towards a zero trust posture, significantly increasing your security posture in the cloud. This scales out very, very easily as well. And we can do it, you don't have to be a full Aviatrix customer. This is kind of the starter use case for many, many organizations. So you can see we'll work in conjunction with an existing TGW, we'll work in conjunction with an existing Cloud WAN deployment. And across all of your regions, all of your accounts, all of your different clouds, you now have one single virtual perimeter that you can use to control your egress traffic. So what does this process look like? It starts by upgrading the NAT gateways. Again, one-for-one replacement, independent of your architecture. Immediately you get cost savings, you get visibility. You start to improve your security posture by adding in that IDS IPS adding in that filtering, moving into the zero trust URL filtering. The next step is you can start to do east-west traffic. So we can start to do things like segmenting dev and prod. We can do things like segmenting multi-tenant environments. And then one thing that's been incredibly surprising to me is, when we were building out this solution, we wanted, we partner very closely with a lot of the other firewall vendors. I expected us to be more complementary, right? But I was very surprised with how many organizations felt like they weren't getting enough out of them and have come to us to actually look at using distributed cloud firewall as the primary security control in their environment. So what's next, right? We have tons of demos of all of this. This is our first reInvent. Really, really excited about a first reInvent where we've introduced distributed cloud firewall. Come to the booth. I know it's late. We got plenty of demos on our websites too. We got tons of webinars. You can get much deeper into what the product does. We also just introduced a 30-day free trial on the marketplace. So if you haven't played around with it yet, super, super easy. Go to the marketplace, subscribe, you get 30 days for free. We are not a SaaS service. Everything gets deployed in your account. So that's sometimes nice from an approval process perspective is you're not giving us anything from your accounts. The control plane gets deployed with the CloudFormation template or a Terraform plan, and then you can start enforcing that policy. You onboard your accounts, and you can start enforcing policy. So check out demos. You can also look at our free trial. We do the TCO analysis as well. It's a great place to start as you're starting to build a business case for this. Cost is incredibly important, and we can help you out there as well. And then lastly, we are huge believers here. In fact, if you've seen any of our advertisements as you've been walking around, one of the things that I think is interesting is one of the core advertisements that we've had at the show this year has been about career advancement. And that's the truth, right? We have a program that we call ACE, the Aviatrix Certified Engineer Program. Tens of thousands of engineers have gone through this. It's really designed to help empower engineers who come from a traditional networking background and want to be relevant in the cloud. It's also designed to empower people who were born in the cloud but might not have a traditional networking background. We want to meet in the middle. Networking is one of those places where there's a lot of knowledge gap, and it's so critical to application performance and the ability to operate the things that actually matter for the business. It's just sometimes invisible. And so we feel very passionately about empowering the community and educating the community. And so we have something called Flight School, which is kind of like it's a free lab training. We run these monthly. You can come in, you can play around with the product. We also have our ACE certification program if you want to go a little bit deeper, and you can find more details about that on our website. So with that, I always think that the best way to start talking about these things is not to listen to me talk about it, but to listen to our customers talk about it. So I'd like to invite Rod back up on stage along with Jason and Brent.
All right. Well, hopefully that was interesting to you. Maybe you guys didn't know all of that, and so great job, Chris, as always, good stuff.
Sure. Thanks, Rod.
So, why don't we start by you guys introducing yourself. Tell us a little bit about your company, the business, how you got into the cloud, that sort of thing.
You bet, yeah. Jason Simpson here, Choice Hotels, VP of Engineering. I run all our cloud engineering for Choice. Choice is a hospitality company, 7,500 hotels globally. We're a pretty cloud forward thinking company, and really wanted to look at something new to help our networking eventually. So
great.
Brett Fowler here, Senior Network Engineer at Republic Airways. I've been there about 6 years, and yeah, we are a regional airline, so we operate for Delta, United, and American. We fly thousands of flights daily, but we don't handle the ticketing. We basically provide the planes, the pilots, the staff, and they handle the rest. So it's kind of a little bit about us. We're based out of the Midwest, so we're primarily in Indianapolis. That's where our training center, maintenance center, our headquarters, and our Lyft Flight Academy is located.
All right, fantastic. And thank you both for being here. It's always great to hear from the customers. Tell us a little bit about your cloud environments. AWS, multi-cloud, what do you have?
Sure, we're 100% AWS. Okay. We've been on that journey for a few years, and honestly, in early next year, we'll shut down our last data center and be 100% cloud.
Well, congratulations.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you.
So yeah, we're AWS and Azure, so multi-cloud. primarily AWS. We migrated our secondary compute over to VMC in AWS. Okay. So it's more of a stepping stone, right? You want to be cloud native, but that was an easy way to get out of our secondary data center. So that was the first step. We do have some production workloads in the cloud currently. So that's in AWS, and we're working on some integration efforts to move some more things to the cloud as well. In Azure, it's primarily database, data lakes, Synapse, that kind of thing in Azure, as well as Active Directory and authentication services.
Great. But having that infrastructure across both is nice to have.
Oh, yeah. It makes it easier to manage, to do everything.
All right, great. So let's change a little bit to like how decisions get made, right? So who makes the decisions about cloud and so forth, or is it a combination of people in the organization?
Yeah, I mean, like to get to the cloud deciding, obviously our CIO helped drive that decision, right? To do cloud in the first place. But honestly, between my platform team and the engineers and the architects, a lot of people kind of lead into, hey, what should we do next, right? What capabilities do we need to help with? So, it's really forward-thinking type stuff.
All right.
Yeah, I would kind of mirror that. Our CIO was the driving force, but he also gives us the ability to make the decisions that kind of impact the operation, right? To drive that from a technical perspective, because he trusts his employees that they know what they're doing, they know that they're taking the best step for the company, and he allows us to do that.
So what do you say is the thing that drives a lot of those decisions? Is it a pain point that you're having and you want to fix? Or is it more forward-looking architecture, cost maybe? What do you guys?
I would think that the decision to go to cloud was pain point, right? We need to be able to do things faster, right? But now that we're pretty much almost all cloud, we're forward-looking. It's all about architecture. What new capabilities can we deliver so our developers can deliver faster stuff for better guest experience? So really, it's all about what's next.
Okay.
Yeah, pretty similar. Cost and security are among the top two things that we focus on right now. Forward-looking is obviously something you have to think about because our cloud presence is only going to grow from here. So you have to look forward to how can we do this better, and that's kind of what we're trying to do.
Okay.
Can I?
Yeah, of course.
On that one. One of the things that's interesting, I've always found, and it's, I think it's one of the reasons that cloud has been so successful is that it gives you so many fundamental building blocks that many different organizations can make it their own, right? And can build the things that are relevant for them. That also comes with unique challenges, right? I mean, it means that you're coming into the cloud and you kind of have to determine what your technology stack is going to look like. And sometimes the tools that the cloud provides that are native tools are going to work for you, and sometimes they're not. And how do you guys go through that platform engineering process where you're determining which pieces of the stack are going to be part of the services that you use to ultimately build out those applications?
I mean, you kind of nailed it there. I mean, we are a platform-first company, and we consider AWS one of our main platforms, right? So typically, we will look to what they are doing to see if that's what we should implement, right? Because if it's native, it's usually better, but not always, obviously, right? So if there's something missing or there's a different capability that we need, we go out and seek to find, some sort of a capability, and obviously, AWS isn't going to do multi-cloud, right? And although we don't have multi-cloud today, we seem to be a little bit acquisitive, so there's a chance that we might, have other clouds in the future. And so,
And I think one thing that I've seen in that space is that it oftentimes at more foundational layers of the stack, those are the things that are sometimes more challenging to migrate, or you want to have the flexibility built around. I see Terraform and HashiCorp being a very popular configuration methodology, despite the fact that we have CloudFormation as a native option, and it's building those foundational skill sets that allow you to be mobile down the road. Does that resonate?
It does. I mean, being able to program what you're going to do and being able to scale differently or make changes like that's kind of feels like the correct direction.
Yep.
And we've decided to actually do CloudFormation.
Yeah.
Right. Terraform. There's some challenges there, at least for us around Terraform. But in general, like being able to program and change things at speed is really what you're going for. So.
Yep. Cool.
Yeah, so that kind of leads into how you guys found Aviatrix. What was it that you needed Aviatrix for? And I know it's a unique story there.
Yeah, well, I mean, honestly, with us, we had a sales guy that was at a different company, and he moved to Aviatrix, right?
Right.
And we weren't, I mean, I think my network, and some of them are sitting here, some of my network engineers are here, and I think they were dealing with the pain and didn't
Just
realize.
dealing with it.
Dealing with it. Didn't realize there was something better that we could leverage. And, no fault of their own, right? They're 24/7, right? So once we found it and started looking at it, we're like, oh, yeah, I think we need this. This is going to help.
All right.
So it was more operational simplicity for us, right? Aviatrix makes things a lot more easy to operate in the cloud. And we're a smaller team, so that helps us to operate more efficiently, which is critical when you have 2 people on your network team, right?
Exactly, right.
So yeah, that's a big part of it is operational simplicity, but then having that consistency across clouds, right? Being able to have a multi-cloud architecture where it's similar at the transit level, where it's not, you don't have to learn new constructs. That's huge as well. And then Copilot's another big one. The visibility, having that ability to see and analyze and resolve issues quickly.
Yeah, great.
That's interesting. I was talking with a customer a while back, and we see that being a very common thread is how do we do more with less in the context of our teams. And, especially in a multi-cloud environment, you're kind of introducing another vendor to some extent, right? And, we've been in the IT industry long enough, like there is benefit to single vendor environments, but this has become just an incredibly complex and competitive platform, world where there's advantages and disadvantages in different ways. So I was talking with a customer, and they were going down a journey where the business had made an acquisition that forced them to be in a multi-cloud environment, and they had 3 guys. And one of them was a networking guy, one of them was a firewalling guy, and one of them was an automation guy. And they said, okay, either we're going to take those guys and we're going to make one cloud number 1, cloud number 2, and one cloud number 3, or we're going to we're going to use some tooling so that they can keep their vertical specialization, but deploy that across multiple different clouds. So it's a common theme, I think, among our customer base.
Absolutely. Let's talk a little bit about the security, right? I mean, one of the things that we're seeing is that there's a kind of a combination of networking and security coming together here. And that, you can see it in the distributed cloud firewall product that's obviously there. We're going right in the path. But do you guys see it in your teams as well, the network and security teams, which traditionally, I think your story when you were talking, Chris, about they're not necessarily friends, they're sort of, do you see those coming together a little bit more?
I think it'll give them an easier way to communicate, right? And being able to do things faster and at scale and being able to understand. Heck, the visibility with Aviatrix is one of the big things. You don't really have that with standard, native networking,
right,
in the cloud. And so having that visibility, now the security people are happier, and then our network engineers are happier because they can go ahead and, fix the traffic or do whatever they need to do. So
that's right.
Definitely, yeah. We're definitely seeing it blend with our security team. We're much closer, right? We're even going as far as giving each other access to things that we didn't have in the past, which that's a big step as a firewall person, right? They typically don't give you any access.
That's right, yeah.
So we see that blend occurring, and then with the ease of deploying next-gen firewalls, we were able to help them to get the firewalls in because they kind of rely on me as the network guy with Aviatrix, right?
Right.
That's kind of my go-to. So.
Right. So you were using the FireNet and doing all of the connections, and
Exactly.
the service insertion that Chris
Yep.
talked about. Okay, great. One of the other things that I see out there a lot of times is that obviously businesses, are concerned with customer satisfaction and revenue and profitability and at the very highest level. But interesting, when I talk to the network guys, they don't know about the application often. They want to build a super robust infrastructure, and it doesn't really matter what the application is. And the opposite, the application guys don't really care about the network. They just want the network to work. And if it doesn't work, it's not their problem. It's somebody else's problem. It's a weird thing that I've seen out there because I always thought that there'd be a connection there. Do you guys see a separation or more of a connection working with the app teams, or how does that?
I can say it's definitely kind of a culture shift of trying to have them work together more, right?
Okay. Right.
If you don't do that, I think you do end up with this in some of these battles. But I mean, you're still going to have that challenge. I mean, there's some developers who are like, why do I have to know network?
I don't need the network.
Yeah, but no, you actually do, because like maybe you should know where your stuff's going.
Yes,
Right? So
right.
it's honestly that feels more cultural, and it's like breaking that down and working with them and building that trust amongst each other.
Yeah, to an extent, that's how it is at our company as well. There's a divide. I don't know how the application works. I'm not going to know the intricate details of how it works. Just like the application developer is not going to know how the network works.
Right.
But we do need to break that down to an extent and figure out how we can work together to make it better, right?
Great. Well, maybe there's things that we can do, and we can pass some information up and back and forth over time that'll kind of come together.
I think that's one of the reasons we looked at smart groups in the first place, right?
Yeah.
I mean, ideally, when I look at my vision for the product, I would like for the app teams to not have to think about the network. I think to some extent they think about it too much, right?
Yeah.
And so if we can create a network that is more application aware, and smart groups are kind of one of the first forays into that by being able to create network policies, but do it in a way that literally has no knowledge of the network for the policy administrator. I mean, it actually enables. It helps enable policy as code because the developer can describe their application and how their application needs to communicate, and they don't have to think about the network, but the network is intelligent enough. And then from a networking team perspective, you can decode it, right? You see it, you see how it's being enforced, you can see what the traffic patterns are. And we tried to design it that way, and that's a lot of where my vision is.
Well,
where we're going.
that's brilliant, Chris, really, because in a way, that's what we do in computer science. We try to abstract this stuff that is hard or doesn't matter. Or, I mean, Amazon talks about, the undifferentiated heavy lifting. Mm-hmm. And if you're doing that for the developers and we can make it easier for them, like, that's fantastic.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, that's great. All right, how about AI? There, I said it. So now we're talking about AI. What are you guys doing? Either just in the business, for customer satisfaction, and maybe do you have any vision for like how that actually comes down to the infrastructure level?
Well, I mean, it's a board level topic now, right?
Yeah,
So
right.
everybody's talking about AI. But I mean, we leverage it today in some of our tools like CrowdStrike or abnormal security or things like that, right?
Uh-huh.
That helps us, protect against threats. And I think that stuff works, really well. Being able to, have more and more capacity on the network because the tons of data that are going to matter for all these training models, like it's going to be interesting to see where it goes. And, we're in hospitality. We're trying to make the guest experience better. And if we can leverage AI to do that, we're going to
do it. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, we use CrowdStrike as well, and I'm sure there's other tools that we use that leverage AI, but we are actually in the middle of a project to try to use generative AI to, I guess, help with scheduling, right? We have a Lyft Flight Academy, and they have some issues with identifying times for students to go fly.
Yeah.
So they're working to get all this data in. I don't know exactly how it works. I'm not an AI person, but yeah, they're going through a little hackathon project right now and trying to leverage that. So that's something we're doing immediately. I'm sure there's going to be a lot more projects, a lot more things down the road. I would really like to see it bleed over into the infrastructure side, right? So you see, the network security performance being not only identified, but also actions being taken.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's where it is. One of the things that we do, and Chris, you can jump in here, but we create a programmable infrastructure, and it's kind of the base that you need. If AI is going to make a decision, it needs to be able to program something. And then what AI, I think, will be able to do is have multiple sliders. Do I want to optimize for performance? Do I want to optimize for cost? Do I optimize for security? And it's going to be a multiple blend of those things that is going to be tied to each application because it'll be different for each application.
Yeah, well, I also say one thing that we've seen, right, is there's all of these, it's just amazing to watch the innovation that the cloud enables people to take advantage of, right? And obviously there've been a ton of sessions at reInvent this week on Bedrock and the work that AWS is doing with generative AI. You go through these waves, right? And that's a huge differentiation for the cloud providers right now. I have had multiple customers come to me who have been primary in another cloud this week, actually, and they came to reInvent to learn about Bedrock, and it's one of those things that's influencing their decisions around whether they become more multi-cloud, right? Because it's such a business differentiator that you want to be able to choose the right partner, you want to be able to choose the right tools, and it's less about where your infrastructure lies right now and more about how do we accelerate the business. So it can be one of those drivers, right? We've seen,
Of course, yeah.
And I think we'll see those cycles over and over again, right? And you want to be able to use the best tools.
Well, that cloud enablement, right? Like,
Exactly.
If we're not
Exactly.
if we didn't have that, we're not doing AI. And then, how is a middle of the road business, non-technical, going to leverage AI like in their data center?
Right, exactly, and do it safely, right? And so we see that as a big driver for the expansion of the network, and has been really, really exciting to see. And I want to enable infra teams, right, to be able to say yes to things a little bit more quickly. Right? I think that's one of the common challenges of being in infrastructure. A common challenge of being in security is that, oh no, you can't do that, or give me like 6 weeks. What if I could say, yeah, you can do that tomorrow? Sounds good, right? And that's a good place to be in.